My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to DO or Do Not. If you're interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is Hadi Tariq. I'm an MS2 at the Alabama College of Osteopathic Medicine, and you are listening to DO or Do Not. On today's episode, we interview Dr. Bernadette Riley, the current director of New York Institute of Technology's Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Hypermobility Treatment Center and an associate professor of family medicine. For those of you that don't know, EDS is a group of rare inherited conditions that affects connective tissue. Dr. Riley cares for these special patients and helps coordinate their care in a multidisciplinary approach. On today's episode, Dr. Riley will share with us her unique journey in medicine, starting her postdoctorate training as an ENT resident and finding out that this was not the correct path for her. She will discuss how she pivoted into family practice and ultimately academic medicine. Outside of clinical medicine, Dr. Riley will discuss her passion for organized medicine as well, such as her role on the executive committee for the Nassau County Medical Society, as well as her role in the AOA House of Delegates. Dr. Riley has made many personal sacrifices to get to her current position today, and she will share the challenges and joys of her journey. We hope you enjoy this episode. My name is Hadi Tariq. I'm a second-year medical student here at ACOM. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Bernadette Riley, who is a family medicine physician, associate professor, and director at NYAT-COM. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So we'll just start off with our first question, which is, as the current director of NYAT-COM's Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome and Hypermobility Center, can you share how you became interested and involved with EDS?
Sure. First of all, the NYIT EDS and Hypermobility Spectrum Disorder Center takes care of a very unique patient population group that has a lot of very unique characteristics. And when I first joined NYIT-COM in 2017, I started seeing some patients who have had these issues, and I really had to do a lot of research and understand a lot about patient issues, because I noticed when they started coming in, they would use acronyms and things even like POTS or EDS and things that I didn't really know a lot of. So then I started doing research and an opportunity presented itself. And we really kind of just went with it and made it into a multidisciplinary center where I'm lucky enough to be the director and provide primary care as well as preventative care and pre-surgical clearances and basically steer the ship for a lot of the patients. And luckily on our team is physiatry, pain management. We have a cardiologist, EP. We also have OMT specialists, as well as physical therapists. We have occupational therapists, and we just really, we have psychology, psychiatry, we have neuropsych, pain management. So we're really lucky to incorporate all these patients and just have this great center. So it came about due to a variety of reasons, but definitely I have an interest in this patient population, and especially that it affects basically every system of the body.
Wow, that's incredible. And I think it's a great resource for patients to have a place where they can go to get all of those aspects of their disease taken care of.
Absolutely.
So my next question is, can you touch on the experience of pursuing further graduate education as a licensed physician? Have there been any unique challenges or advantages, and what motivated you to pursue an additional degree?
Okay. So for myself, I had a lot of challenges in my residency and really deciding what I wanted to do. I personally went to NYIT-COM, enjoyed my years from 2001 to 2005, and loved being a medical student. Even as a medical student, I wasn't sure what I wanted to be because I was a female. Many people just assumed that I wanted to be a pediatrician. And I kind of fought that because I said, oh, and now I realize, if I was a pediatrician, that would have been great too. But I really wanted what I thought more for myself. In the end, look, everything is more for yourself. And I just felt like maybe I wanted to pursue a surgical subspecialty. And that's what I did start in ENT, facial plastic surgery. And that was during my years in New Jersey. And, that is a challenging field in itself. And being a female too is very challenging. So I quickly realized, not quickly, because 3 years after, I didn't think I had the personality and the wherewithal and also the resilience that is needed in that type of specialty. And I always really enjoyed patient care and a longitudinal approach to patient care. So I did switch to family medicine, and I finished my residency training in a year and a certain amount of months. Luckily, and then my last year, I was the chief resident. So I was lucky enough to have that opportunity. And then I went on and I was always involved in medical education. And I had an interest in public health, as you could see, and became certified in a multitude of things, such as doing international medicine, public health. I always enjoyed more education. Right now, I'm in my master's in clinical nutrition because I do feel that there's a need, especially for EDS and hypermobility spectrum patients. But I did find the postgraduate world of medicine challenging for me personally. It encompassed my entire life. Everything that I do 100%. So I did never get married or have children and stuff. So I did devote an enormous amount of my personal life to my career. And with that, a lot of positives happened in that I was able to succeed in a lot of stuff. But I do look at my life sometimes and just say, wow, I spent a lot of time in my postgraduate training and just figuring out myself and how to be a doctor. And sometimes in that, you realize that, there are a lot of positives and some negatives to those.
That's such a great answer. I think many of us always feel that struggle of how much time do we devote to school and work versus our personal lives.
I feel that is an issue, especially amongst DOs and especially amongst females.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you touched on how you got involved with health policy and advocacy. So can you talk more about the importance of it to physicians now that you're on the other side?
Well, I think health advocacy is important to everyone in every specialty and every healthcare provider there is, because as you will see a lot of inequities in healthcare, and you are going to be exposed to healthcare disparities from everything from the transportation system to the daily life. And a lot of times you will say, like for myself, I constantly say, what could I do to make this better? And it could be frustrating because many changes that I try to install, unfortunately, for whatever reason, doesn't help the patient. So I always had a passion for helping others, and especially those with either a chronic disability or who I felt were underserved. So with that, I really took that and said, what can I do to improve on my skill in regards to that? So the first thing I did was the TIPS Fellowship, which is now known as the Osteopathic Health Policy Internship. And it was then known as TIPS, and that was Training in Policy Studies. And that was from the AOA. And what that was a year fellowship where we get to travel to places like Washington, D.C., Chicago, meet with legislators, and also learn about health policy during my postgraduate training. During that time, I was exposed to other fellows. It was a competitive program, so there weren't many, but many of the fellows did go on to achieve many great things. They were all DOs. And after that, I always knew that I wanted to pursue the Osteopathic Health Policy Fellowship. And that is for seasoned physicians who are really deep in their career. And again, run through the AOA, ACOM. Actually, this one's run through ACOM. And I did that I was really looking forward to seeing all the osteopathic medical schools, but of course, it happened during the COVID pandemic. So I only made it to 3 of them, but afterwards it became virtual. And of course, I was able to be exposed to my class, which had 10 other really amazing healthcare providers, physicians, and other people in the osteopathic world. And to be exposed to people who have achieved so much greatness. And I remember in my first year as a delegate for the AOA in 2010, when I had just graduated from my residency, and Dr. Karen Nichols was being elected. And in those days, there used to be this magazine called The DO, and in front of it would have pictures of the presidents of the AOA. And I remember looking at all the presidents of the AOA and basically thinking them as like, these great big movie stars. So the fact that I could be at Dr. Nichols, the first female DO's presidential inauguration, was such an honor to me. And to meet all these really great masters in the DO field, I was just really hooked at a young age. And when I saw that, then I realized, I would like to make more of a difference. I got involved in the board of NISOMS. I've been on the board for many, many years, over 12 years. It took me a long time to be president. I think I'm the only president of NISOMS that has had to do the secretary role twice. I feel like I always wanted to get further and always had to fight for it. But I really believe in health advocacy and health policy. As president of NISOMS right now, we have a lot of initiative. I have a passion for also training others, especially osteopathic medical students who are interested in health advocacy. I started 2 curriculums. One is the Osteopathic Health Policy Congressional Fellowship at Old Westbury campus, which is a 2-year fellowship in the campus where a student will be involved in local, state, and national politics and learn about health policy, health advocacy, legislative issues, meeting with assembly people, meeting at all levels. Our osteopathic fellow now, our congressional health policy fellow now, has been to the AMA in meetings in Hawaii, has had opportunities for House of Delegates, and really is just an all-around star. And that's our second fellow. So we've had the program for 4 years. We're currently interviewing our third fellow. And I also offer the Congressional Health Policy Fellowship elective, and that's for 4th-year students who have an interest in health policy. And they can do a 4-week elective shadowing me where we will meet and basically try a health policy issue of their choice and meet with legislators, maybe get a health policy brief published, and just do things for the passion of the student, which I have learned so much for. For example, one of my students are very interested in organ donation. And just by their research and hearing about it and meeting them weekly in Zoom meetings and everything, I realized, wow, that is so interesting. There's so much to that I didn't realize. And another student had a real passion for DEI. And just when we go through all of the research that's done and all of the opportunities that there are and all of the systems, like, for example, the U.S. Preventative Task Force is changing their language to a gender neutral form. So when you read stuff like that, you just realize, you can be involved at a lower level. And then perhaps with your meetings, your networking, and on and on and on, you can then go on and experience greater things. So then I went through, from that, I was asked to be the delegate for MISNI for NYITCOM. And so prior to the pandemic, I became one. I saw how that was. I was a delegate for the AOA through NISOMS for many, many years. And I saw that MISNI delegation, which has just about as much delegates as the whole American delegation of the AOA. So it was really interesting to see that. And I sat with them for the 4 days and got to know the County Medical Society leadership. And I was lucky enough to be asked by the president at the time if I was interested in applying to a board position. And I was just so impressed and I couldn't believe it. I said, wow, the fact that I sat there and, learned my resolutions, studied, and even as a seasoned physician, even for that, I was just very impressed with everything that happened. So I joined the board of the Nassau County Medical Society in 2019, where I'm currently the treasurer. And also there is the Nassau Academy of Medicine. And that I'm the chair of the education committee where we hold CMEs for all types of students, get people involved. For example, like the NYITCOM students, MISNI is helping them this week in that they are doing a peer-to-peer supported training. I've been a peer for many years since the COVID pandemic. It was started where, like myself as a clinician who had to work through the pandemic and scared for myself, scared for my parents, scared that I could be bringing diseases, because I would see COVID positive patients home to loved ones, and people didn't want to stay within 10 feet of me, and so during that time, it was a very isolating, lonely time. MSNY was so wonderful in starting a peer-to-peer program. I immediately got trained in it to be one peer, and it's a great thing, because a lot of physicians are afraid to talk to mental health providers or things for fear that it could be on some state licenses, and little things like this are issues, health advocacy issues, that I always think about and fight for when I go on the state, local, and national level on stuff like that. So I got involved basically by having people, for example, how it all started in 2010 with the House of Delegates being elected to that, was someone I knew couldn't go to Chicago or didn't want to go. So she said, would you like to do this? And I said, oh, absolutely. And then just going there and going on. So a lot of the things is just showing up, showing a passion, showing an interest, being exposed to wonderful people and wanting to learn from them. And I also really enjoy networking. I've always loved talking and talking to people. And not as much about my life, but I love learning about other people's lives and hearing how they were exposed to things and how they became in their positions. So I think networking is a big thing as well, but health advocacy is important on such a big level for so many reasons. Absolutely. But that's how I got involved.
Wow, that is truly so impressive. I think many of us see positions like that and we think there's so many barriers to entry, when you make it seem like you're truly just working for yourself and your peers because you know what it can be like as a physician, right?
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many people that I know in my medical school have come up to me and said, why do you do all these things? Like, what is the purpose? Do you get paid for any of these? I'm like, no, it's not, this has consumed your life. This is why you're not married. This is why you're not. And maybe that is the case, but it has become very rewarding for me. Many of my hobbies are work related. And if any student or anyone can easily be any of the titles that I am, easily. And if anyone needed help to it, I always, in board meetings and everything, I always try to pick and choose. I don't want to be exclusive. So I try to open it up first. And, so it's not just the people I know, but clearly there are so many opportunities, especially as you get further along in your career. Many people are so busy with just their everyday lives that they can't do these extra stuff that are at nights or on weekends, and they don't really have as much of an interest. So I definitely encourage anyone could be in the position that I'm in. And of course, with that becomes great responsibility. But if anyone wanted to reach out or for more information or help, I would definitely be willing to talk to anyone or help anyone. I definitely do that at NYITCOM, and I'd be willing to anywhere else.
Well, that's really generous of you. And I'm sure our listeners would love to take you up on that opportunity. So my next question is kind of going back into your origin story and how it all kind of started. My question is, how did you become interested in medicine in the first place and decided you wanted to be a doctor?
Well, I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. My parents said that I told them at the age of 2, I want to be a doctor. And I grew up in a very, very loving family. My grandmother lived with us, my mother's mother, and she was sickly. And my mother said, I always said, I want to take care of you, Nanny, when you get older. I was very, very loved. I was the youngest child. My parents felt education was extremely important. They always pursued. They never once said, oh, we hope our daughters grow up to be family people and have a bunch of children and get married. They always said, we hope our daughters become doctors. And that's just the way that I grew up. And I always wanted to be a physician of some sort. And my sister has her PhD and she's a psychologist and she is an educator and she's achieved so much. So I have that as an older sister, which is always like a goal. I always, as girls, we did have sibling rivalry. So that was always something. My sister achieved so much. She's such an accomplished musician, singer, actress, just everything that I wasn't good at. Like, for example, we both took piano lessons for 17 years and I can play the Teddy Bears Picnic and she can play concertos. So it just happens that I didn't have that kind of gene. I was a dancer, I was a ballerina, which I think helps in my EDS work, but I was not someone who was great with music or stuff like that. So for me, science was always great. I was always a studier. I always always would be studying. My dad said on my graduation, he said, we never had to tell Bernadette to study or do homework because that was very important to me. And I knew getting good grades was important. I then went on to Fordham University. And then there I was a biology major. I was in the biology chairman's circle, which is basically a small group of people who knew they wanted to be physicians. And the chairman would really encourage them to continue with their studies and do things to ensure that that is a possibility. And then when I was in my second year, the bio chairman took me aside and said, I know a doctor and he's a DO. And I think you should look into DO schools because I'm not 100% sure you'll make it in an MD school. And, in those days, I definitely did not want to take a gap year. That was rare. I had one interview at an MD school, but I did interview at NYIT Com and they were so kind to me. I do remember them being like, just really kind, the two physicians that interviewed me. And I was happy, but also ambivalent because I wasn't that really aware of what DOs were. Also, I had a lot of people telling me, oh, DOs aren't like MDs. They're not as great. I come up from a family, like our extended family went to Harvard Medical School. So, there's that, some people at that time frame, which is 2001, felt the need to tell me that DO school was a little bit below MD school or maybe a lot below. So it was hurtful to me, but I went with it. I got in. I was thankful for the opportunity to be a doctor. And like I said, DO school opened up a lot of opportunities that I don't think would have been available to me as an MD. I think personally, I wouldn't have gotten into ENT if I was an MD. I think at the time, DOs had their own residency program. So there were a lot of opportunities for others, very competitive specialists as well. And that's the story.
That's truly an incredible story and very inspiring too, because I think a lot of us grow up thinking we want to be a doctor, but we're not sure of our capabilities of becoming one. And so I think the lesson really is to stick with it and
absolutely
make use of your role models, right?
That's true.
So my next question is about what was your application process like to residency? You touched on entering in ENT and facial plastics, and then what made you want to switch to family medicine and OMT?
Okay, so the application process, when I was a medical student, I actually applied to anesthesia. As you know, like in those days, they used to have a DO and I got into the DO ENT program, and that was an earlier match. They used to have a DO match, and then they'd have an MD match. So I interviewed for a bunch of places. They were really kind, really wonderful places for anesthesia, because that would have been my second choice at the time I thought of it. And they were wonderful places. And then once I matched an ENT, they automatically take you off of the MD match. So you knew where you were going. For me personally, it was a good, I'm still, keep in touch with the program director. Nothing bad happened. It just wasn't for me. But the application process, I actually really enjoyed. I loved going to the interviews. Then they were in person. So they would take us, for example, I did an interview at Columbia and they took us to the Columbia dining room and you got to see that. You also learned the different places. If you were in the city, some of the places really would require Spanish speaking, or you got to learn, as a resident, oh, these are things or these are skills I would have to acquire. Myself, I speak French, but not Spanish. So that was also something I was thinking of with different populations. And I enjoyed my interview process. I thought people were really kind in medical school as well. I really enjoyed my rotations. People were very kind to me. People really liked me in the OR, in the OR setting. I have to say that it was very different when I was an intern, because you are responsible for a lot of things, and suddenly it becomes, you realize, as a student, I really didn't have much responsibility. I was also just like a young, really kind young woman, and at the time, there wasn't much responsibility. So as a student versus internship, it was different, in residency, but I enjoyed my interview process, and I've heard great things about the interview process now, even though it's virtual due to COVID, and who knows what it will change.
So the residency programs and how everything is set up now for DOs is very different than how it was back then. And so
absolutely.
it's just,
I do know, because I do have students, but I know it's not easy for you guys. It was much easier for me.
Well, everyone has their own challenges. That's definitely true. So now we'll transition to your experience after residency. So can you tell us more about your experience looking for a job, and how did you choose the location, hospital, and the program of your choice?
Absolutely. So I hate looking for jobs. Even now, if it was up to me, I'd stay in the same job for 35 years, because I just don't like the interview process and looking for jobs. So I was the chief resident at my residency, and the boss asked me to stay on. And I knew I wanted to be involved in medical education in some ways. And they had a residency, and eventually I became the program director. So there were a lot of positives, but I still went on some interviews. But I have to be honest, because I was offered that job, I didn't go on many, because I had a feeling that I enjoy comfort, and this was very comfortable for me. I knew exactly the people that I'd be working with. It had a range of teaching as well as opportunities for other things. When I would go on an interview, I went on just a few. I knew I wanted to be in the area of like maybe Westchester, Long Island. I'm from Rockland County, so I knew I wanted to be in that area. And I did have an interview upstate where they were really kind. They took me out to dinner, showed me around, and they were nice, but I kind of always knew in my mind, oh, I'm probably going to take this job. And then I was at Long Beach, and Long Beach, because of Hurricane Sandy, closed. They went in bankruptcy, and that was a really struggle. That was in 2014, because I was going to be losing my job. And also this other hospital was coming in, and they offered me a position where I would stay in the same office, a little bit different, but the same kind of office. And at that time, I went on a couple of interviews that other people had tried to talk to me. And so they asked me to interview at a couple of other osteopathic medical schools, to which I did. But again, being the type of person that likes comfort, I went and stayed at with the same location, different job, but I knew that my time there would be finite. And then I had a certain amount of year contract. Before the contract was done, I was recruited by NYITCOM, which I always wanted to be, at NYITCOM. Who wouldn't, right? It's such a wonderful place to work. And so that's how I ended up where I am. But if it was up to me, I wouldn't go on any job interviews, because especially I'm lucky that a lot of DOs know me as the president of NISOMs, and just with things that I've done through the years, and that DOs know me. But other people, when you go on an interview, they don't know who you are. They're just going with, and found out the hard way when I was interviewing for medical school, actually MD school. In interviews, I always thought that they went great and everyone was kind and lovely. And I went on this one interview with this person who wasn't kind and lovely. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that woman didn't like me. And so and who knows what was going on in her mind? Who knows what was going on? As an older person now, who knows what the feeling was? But interviewing in general makes me a little nervous, but it is done. Some people treat you very well. They take you out to dinner. They really want you and show you as you get older in your career, luckily, lots of times you get recruited. So people really go after you.
Well, it's amazing that it worked out for you and that you ended up staying where you wanted to stay.
Yeah, it worked out.
And I'm not sure if you touched on this in your answer, but could you touch a little bit more on how you knew you wanted to be involved in academic medicine?
Sure. Well, I always knew I wanted to be involved in academic medicine because at the age of 17, I started substituting in a city school district in Mount Vernon. I come from a family of educators, and I always really enjoyed teaching. And so from that point on, when I was a resident and chief resident, I always had students. So I enjoyed teaching students. I always liked, even when I was a student, I took positives and negatives from different residents and the way they taught and try to say, oh, I want to be more like that. I want to teach more like that. So I always liked medical education. I stayed involved in medical education, and that led me. It was postgraduate at first in regards to being a program director, teaching residents, but now I'm in the undergrad level, which is very rewarding as well.
And with that, that leads me to my final question for you today, which is, what was the best piece of advice that you got throughout your education and your career that you always think of and would like to pass on to current students?
Absolutely. Well, that's easy because I remember it distinctly. I was on my surgical sub-I, and there was the chief resident, and he was going into plastic surgery. They had already gotten their fellowship match, and they're towards their end of their career. And I was a fourth-year medical student doing a sub-I. And one day, the third-year medical students were not in. They had something to do. So at sign out, the third year's responsibility was to do the labs and to say the labs at the end of the day. And sign out was really important. It was at 7 p.m. So everyone was ready to go home after a long day. And so since the third years weren't there, I had to do that instead of what I was doing, which was mostly the OR and other things with the chief residents. So I said, oh, today's going to be such an easy day. All I have to do is the labs. And then they had a couple computers, but not really a lot of laptops. They had limited funds. So you would be writing down everything on a piece of paper and ready for the labs. You couldn't get to them really quickly for the amount of patients we had. So at sign out, the chief resident who just basically oversees the sign out, they started talking about a patient who had just had a thyroidectomy. And they said, okay, well, what are the labs? And I say, well, the labs. And they're like, well, what's the PTH level? What's the calcium level? And I had the calcium level because it's in a CMP, but I didn't write down the PTH level. And they were like, PTH, that's so needed. We just did a thyroidectomy. What were you thinking? And the other members of the team, and I was like, oh, that's weird. But, they didn't chastise me. They just said, oh, okay, next time, and then the next patient was there, and they had some kind of big surgery again. And again, I went through all the labs. I thought this was the easiest thing. And then they said something like, oh, well, what's the magnesium level? It was a lab that's not in the usual lab draws. So I said, oh, I didn't write it down. And I'll never forget this. The chief resident, who was a very, very man of few words, he said, that is a very important thing. This is the second time you forgot a lab. Those are really important because they affect the patient in those specific opportunities. Please don't do that again. And he said it at that level, and just so, without any kind of judgment or any kind of things. And I could tell you, I never forgot those labs again. And I looked at him and I said, that is the kind of teacher I want to be. I personally learn better without people screaming at me. I was not screamed at as a child by my father. I'm not used to a lot of screaming. I mean, since then, believe me, I've been a screamer and have dealt with a lot of screaming. But I said to myself, as an educator, that's how I want to be. People do make mistakes, and he did call me out on it very publicly, but he did it in a way to let me know that this affects the patient, first of all, and second of all, that this is something that, is important and to not forget it next time. So my advice to everyone is to find a mentor, or at least even find someone like what I saw, parts of people's personality that you want to be like when you become an attending and when you get the opportunity to tell people what to do, quote unquote. A good quote is, don't be a boss, be a leader. And I think that that's really important. So for everyone, the field of medicine is a great field. I'm so happy I went in it. I couldn't see myself doing anything else. Personally, osteopathic medicine is the way for me. I couldn't see myself as anything other than a DO. I think that there's a lot of opportunities for kindness in this world, especially for DO to DO, DO to MD, MD to DO, whoever. There's a lot of opportunities to bring people up. I hope to bring a lot of people up. I mean, the future generations are just so amazing. I am so amazed at how accomplished, my residents were, my students were, and all that they've accomplished. And I really think that there's a need, especially amongst female physicians, to really rise up the coming generations, because there's so much opportunity there, and they are everyone is so well trained that I really think that my advice would be, find someone who's kind, who's a good person as well as a good physician, and really follow them and try to be like them, and while also maintaining your individuality. And there are people like that out there, and if you want to do a certain path, you can do it. If you are halfway through the path and you realize this isn't for you, don't take it. You're not stuck in life, in any part of your life. And I also want to say that the only reason why I'm on this podcast is because Stav, the executive director of Nassau County Medical Society, asked me to be on it because of Dr. Storch. And he is an example of, what great DOs can be. And I heard through the grapevine that all of his students also like that this podcast is watched by how many people?
I can't keep track. There's a lot.
It's a lot. So opportunities like that with people like you and Dr. Storch and and expressing ourselves. And I think one of the big things that as DOs we need to do, when I go out, even on social situations, I always say, I am Bernadette, I am a DO. And I can't tell you how many people, very educated people, say to me, oh, what's that? And then I try to explain it as best as I could. And then they say, oh, so you're like a PhD. Oh, you're like a PhD, or oh, you're like a PA, or oh, you're like an NP, which is fine. I don't mind it, but I do think that I need to do a better job of explaining what a DO is. And I do think that we need more visibility, which I think we're getting. So I make it a point to not say I'm Dr. So-and-so. I make it a point to say I'm Dr. So-and-so DO. And so hopefully with things like that, it just gets more recognized. People understand it more, know what you do. And also we could still maintain our individualities as different than MDs, but we're fully licensed. We're in different specialties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great piece of advice to end on, because medicine sometimes gets that stigma of being a toxic learning environment, and taking that piece of advice of finding positivity where you can and then amplifying it. That's such a great piece of advice to take on.
Thank you. You were a wonderful interviewer, Hadia, really.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there's someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tian Yu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.